Welcome everyone. Tonight is October 5th, 2022, and I call the City of Bothell Planning Commission meeting to order. The main purposes of tonight's meeting is a public hearing on middle housing code amendments. Tonight's meeting is hybrid. The city is providing the option to attend either in person or remotely via Zoom. For those on Zoom, the chat and question functions are not enabled so that we're compliant with the Open Public Meetings Act. We'll have space tonight for public comment at the beginning of the meeting for comments on issues not related to tonight's agenda. Please limit those comments to just 3 minutes. Public comment and hearing testimony will be allowed both in person and via Zoom. Commenters were asked to submit an online form by 3 p.m. today. Emails were encouraged as well. Attendees may also make comments that have been asked to indicate their desire to comment on the sign-in sheets. The Imagine Bothell notice, city's website, and tonight's agenda all provided information to the public for providing comments. The video of tonight's meeting will be streamed live, as well as recorded and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. There's a call-in number on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen live to the meeting. For our phone-in callers, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they're referencing during presentations so everyone can follow along. At this time, we're going to take a moment to acknowledge the attendance of the commissioners. Chair Kiernan.
Here.
Great. Commissioner Westerbeck.
Here.
I'm Chair Pro Tem for Curd. Commissioner Robson.
Present.
Does your mic work?
Thank you. Present.
Awesome. And Commissioner Gustafson.
Here.
Great. In addition, tonight we have Interim Community Development Director Ashley Winchell, Senior Strategic Planner Dave Boyd, and we're also joined by Sarah Breakstone from OTAC as well.
And Commissioner Anders.
Commissioner Anders is here as well. Thank you. Sorry. Lastly, before we begin, I'm going to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. And if you're also streaming the live video feed, please turn off the sound as there is a delay. For commissioners, at specific breaks in the presentation, I'm going to be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question. I promise I will start looking at the Zoom screen as well. Sorry. So this, bear with me. If you want to speak, raise your hand or indicate it with your microphone. I'm going to call it as I see it. This will help avoid the problem of 2 people speaking at the same time. Try to identify yourself before you speak. Please mute your microphones when not speaking. All right. Moving along, item 2 on the agenda is public comment. The first item on tonight's agenda is public comment. The city has accepted visitor comment in writing as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Written comments submitted to staff no later than 3 p.m. today were forwarded to all commissioners and are part of the record. This time is for items that are not on tonight's agenda.
We do have one call-in person. I'm going to allow that person to talk. So the person that is calling in, would you like to speak on a non-agenda item? And you'll need to, there you go.
Hello, this is Ann Agard. No, I want to speak on the item on the agenda, but I have not been able to get my Zoom, the visual part to open yet, so I don't know if they've opened it.
We have opened the meeting, so you might try rejoining, but we will get back to you by phone.
I have tried rejoining several times.
Okay. When we get to that point, though, I will give you a chance to speak. And also, we were joined by Mac Carter. And I assume, Mr. Carter, that you're looking to comment on the agenda item on the middle housing?
Yeah, that would be correct.
Okay, we'll promote you to a panelist when we get to that point. Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Moving on, item number 3 is approval of the minutes. We have before us the meeting minutes from September 21st, 2022. Are there any items to discuss on the minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Commissioner Westerbeck,
I move to accept the minutes as written.
we have a motion on the floor. Commissioner Gustafson,
Sarah Gustafson here, I'll second.
there is a motion and a second to approve the meeting minutes from September 21st. All those in favor, please indicate.
Aye.
Aye.
It's a unanimous consent. The meeting minutes are adopted. Number 4, new business. Senior Planner Boyd, is there any new business for the commission tonight?
I have none.
Great. We'll move on to the public hearing, number 5, on middle housing code amendments. This is a continued public hearing.
So go ahead and open the continued public hearing, and I'll introduce our guest.
I open the continued public hearing on the middle housing code amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is continued from June 20th, at which time we had suggested putting this on hold while we got into our new middle housing implementation grant with Commerce. But the commission made it clear that they would like to move forward and make a recommendation at the earliest point possible. So we have done our best to bring you a packet that you can go ahead and move forward if you're comfortable with that tonight. It came together at the last minute, and I apologize. I was the last one to touch it, so there are some glitches in the packet, particularly in the note boxes that I didn't fully finish editing. So I just wanted to take responsibility for that. Before passing it off to our consultant, Sarah Breakstone with OTAC, to go through a presentation highlighting some of the questions that we'd like you to address, and then we can get into it in more detail on a page-by-page review. I'd also like to point out that since July, we've been busy. We've had at least a couple more meetings with utility district managers about, and as well as our own building department and fire departments about some of the issues with implementing middle housing and things like metering middle housing and billing issues and all. Nothing's come up in those discussions that would change the zoning code amendments that we're discussing with you, but we have been, those meetings are ongoing and will be supported by the middle housing implementation grant. We've also managed between July and now to have the legal review done. So the document that you've got before you now does incorporate a number of changes, clarifications made by our deputy city attorney. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah Breakstone to run through her presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dave. I'm Sarah Breakstone. I'm a senior planner with OTAC. I'm part of the team that's been working with Dave and others on these code amendments for, well, I guess probably the last 12 months or so. Okay, I'm gonna share this screen. And you should see the full page slide. Is that what you're seeing?
Yes.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. Let me just adjust my screen here so I can see more of you. All right. Okay. Yeah, very simple agenda. We will go through the proposed code amendments. Some items are new since the last time, and some are just kind of reminders. And then Dave is going to give an update on the new middle housing implementation grant. and talk about next steps. So jumping right into it, I also have and can share the code amendments themselves. I assume you all have a copy of that. It was in your packets. And I'll try to reference the page numbers as we go along so you know which part I'm talking about. At the very beginning are some definitions. A lot of these have been in here for a while, but we did add a new definition for single family attached building types. Essentially, it's like a townhouse or a row house, except that each unit, although they are attached to each other, each unit is on its own individual lot. And that was a distinction that the planning group there felt we needed to make in the definition. So that's in there now. We also added a definition for middle housing, which basically incorporates all of these housing types: duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, cottages, et cetera, to make it easier to reference middle housing in other places in the code instead of having to list all of the housing types comprised within that definition. And then we made some clarifying adjustments to some of the definitions that were already in there. I'm happy to take questions as I go along. I can't quite see everybody, so just feel free to jump in and let me know if you want to discuss.
This is Vice Chair Kurd. I also can't see people on Zoom, and so it might be helpful when you get to natural stopping spots for questions, just to stop sharing the screen briefly, and so we can check in.
Sure.
Thank you.
I will note that in the code amendment memo, there were a number of questions related to the definitions, but those are really mostly internal questions, so not questions that the questions that we really want the Planning Commission to address are about either new items or revised items. We're going to identify in the presentation. So go ahead.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah. So there is some new language. This is in the section of code that talks about permitted uses, and this is where we added middle housing types as permitted uses in all of the single family residential zones. I think this language starts on page 17 of your packet if you're trying to follow along. I don't think there's anything new there since the last time, except we did add some language that I believe was drafted by the city attorney for Bothell that prevents homeowners associations from drafting new covenants to restrict middle housing types. So if there is an existing covenant for a homeowners association that restricts middle housing, they can continue to have that restriction, but this language is intended to prevent new covenants from being developed as of the adoption date of this code. So I think also on page 17, there's some language about affordable housing, but I think the bulk of the language that we're really talking about here is on page 23. And this has to do with the affordable housing requirement, which now applies, according to these revisions. Affordable housing is required for all new subdivisions of 10 lots or more. And I think there's a question there. I think it's referenced on page 23 of your packet. Or it's kind of a two-part question. Should middle housing bonuses apply to short plats? And if so, should short plats that achieve 10 or more units through that bonus be subject to the affordable housing requirements? Or does that provide, or is that a disincentive to this type of development? So I think that is where we're looking for a little bit of guidance. So maybe should I stop sharing, Dave? You want to have some discussion around that?
Sure.
Okay. And let me know if I need to reword the question in a way that makes better sense. But I think it's kind of a two-part question. Should middle housing bonuses be available for short plats? Short plats are land divisions of less than 10 lots. And if they can use the middle housing bonus, and they get more than 10 units, should they be required to provide affordable housing?
And I'll elaborate on that a little bit. We've been focused on new subdivisions of 10 or more in terms of the bonus, and then allowing middle housing on other single-family lots in existing developed areas. We hadn't really discussed short plats, so the question came up, could somebody do a 9-lot short plat with a 4-plex on every lot, 36 units? We didn't think that was in the spirit of what we've discussed so far, so we've drafted this to have the same 20 and 40% bonuses depending on proximity to transit and trails for short plats, but in keeping with the spirit also that has been discussed so far of not requiring affordability, contractual affordability for 10 units or less. The question is, should that apply to short plats, and should it be applied to the number of lots? So you could still do a 9-lot short plat, and with the 40% bonus, and do 12 to 13 units with middle housing, but should the threshold for the affordability requirement be based on the number of units or on the number of lots? So.
And I'll add to that I think the language in your code now is the threshold is 10 units, right? Not lots. So do we need to make that distinction?
And I'll interject. Mike Stanger from Arch wasn't able to join us, but he did weigh in. Once again, he would prefer to keep the 5-lot threshold, and the code as drafted, we did include both 5 and 10, but last time around, I think we got pretty clear direction that you wanted to raise it to 10. But part of his point was that those fractional units do generate a fair amount of in lieu fees that create a fair amount of funding for other affordable housing projects.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thank you. I tend to think that keeping it units is actually going to yield more affordable housing. And I for one, know that can be a deterrent for some developers, but I just think it's also a matter of simplicity in the code. My experience with missing middle is there are going to be a lot of projects that don't use lot divisions like we would see with fee simple projects, townhouses and cottages and so forth. We'll probably see a triplex here and there, a 4-plex, some things that don't require any lot divisions at all. So if it's units, I think we're going to end up with more affordable housing in the end. So that would be my thought. And a unit is just kind of easy to keep track of. I mean, if we want to incentivize units and less lot splits, then you would probably make it lots instead, but to sort of incentivize or disincentivize behavior. But I don't know that we are going for that approach. So I would keep it with units, I think.
And what about the question of short plats that achieve 10 or more units? Should they also be subject to the same affordability requirements?
Yeah, I'm still noodling on that. I'm curious what my fellow commissioners might say.
And if I could just add one more. So the thinking is that if the affordability requirement did kick in anytime you went over 10 units, a 9-lot short plat there might be a disincentive for them to even do a single middle housing unit. So that was the thinking behind keep having the threshold be the number of lots rather than the number of units.
Got it. Okay. It's a lot to keep track of.
So it automatically applies to any long subdivision.
Okay.
And automatically would not apply to any short plat.
Short. Okay.
Are there any other commissioner comments or so processing this? Commissioner Gustafson.
Hi, Sarah Gustafson here. I do have a question that's a bit tangential. Oh dear. When we're trying to figure out how these units are aggregated for applying the affordable housing requirements, I still think we might want more definition on what counts as an adjacent unit by the same developer, because that might also impact the short plats. I think you don't want to get into a situation where the development is basically one big development, but the developer's trying to say, oh no, they're two different ones because they're not right next to each other. And there's a shell company, so we're not the same developer.
We do, that's already happened with developers trying to avoid long plats by doing two adjacent short plats. And we have code language in there that I think effectively addresses that. Sorry, that's not part of these amendments. It's part of the general lot subdivision regulations.
I guess I'll weigh in briefly, understanding that this is not necessarily deliberations, but we're just talking about clarifying sort of the heart of these code amendments. And I would suggest that the elements of the comprehensive plan that encourage abundant housing and diversity of housing forms for people would guide us in our decision on clarifying this, because we would be looking for, we'd be not looking to disincentivize middle housing forms at the cost of creating affordable housing. So what I mean by that would be that we would be choosing the definition for the word units instead of lots. And if a subdivision is able to achieve through middle housing forms 10 or more units, they would not be subject to the affordability requirements, because if they were, it would disincentivize the production of those alternative housing forms. But interested to hear what other people's opinions and thoughts are on that. Commissioner Westerbeck.
The idea being, just to clarify, not disincentivizing them, and therefore we'd rather have the 3 or 4 or 5 extra homes over having fewer and 1 or 2 affordable, kind of a housing abundance approach, even if each one is market rate. Is that sort of the idea behind it? Or am I not understanding that properly?
Thanks. Yeah.
Might get more units in total.
Yeah, this is Vice Chair Curd. My interpretation of the comprehensive plan, that is my own interpretation. There are other interpretations, and I think there are probably things that we're not thinking about.
Sure.
Here in this, without seeing and reacting. This is more proactive, and so it's hard to make a decision and know exactly what the outcome will be. Yeah. Any other commissioner comments on this?
Should we move on?
I
I guess I've got a question maybe for you, Dave, about, I guess it's a process question. If the plan for this hearing is to move a recommendation forward to City Council, which is my understanding of what we're trying to do tonight, do we need specific guidance to make amendments in this draft before it goes to city council? Does that need to be part of does that need to be part of the motion?
Ideally, yes, we would make amendments to the code that is an attachment to the findings, and that would go forward to council. That doesn't mean that, that council can't make changes to that, or that staff might not even make some suggestions for council to make some tweaks to the planning commission recommendations as we do more analysis. But yeah, if the commission wants to make a recommendation tonight, it would be it would include the code amendments. So, and we will, when we go back to the actual code language, we can kind of get to a final decision. I realize we sprung this on you, and it was one that kind of we sprung on ourselves. But the idea here is that if we allow get short plats the bonus and keep the threshold at 10 units and not 10 lots, I think there will be a disincentive for a 9-yard lot short plat to include middle housing. I mean, of course, that'll depend on the developer, but so that was the reason why we raised this question for you. So I think you can mull it over a little bit more, and we'll get back to it when we get to the code language.
Not seeing other commissioner comments, I would concur. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I will keep going. This is not necessarily new language. This is language that starts on page 21, and this has to do with lot size averaging. Last time you saw this draft, I believe this language was in here as sort of like an option, and feedback from staff is that this is the direction that we want to take. So we're replacing some existing language that tried to get at lot size averaging for a couple of zones, and we're just allowing lot size averaging for all the single family residential zones. Lots can be reduced or lots can be bigger as long as the average of those lots meets the minimum lot size. And lots cannot be reduced smaller below the minimum lot size for like the next densest zone. And there's an example in the code, I don't have it up in front of me, to try to clarify what that looks like. But for example, a lot in your 9600 zone couldn't go below 8400, which is your next densest zone below that, if that makes sense. So the idea here is to just provide more flexibility in lot sizes to facilitate development of more housing types, to facilitate small lot, single family, to facilitate maybe a larger lot that could hold a fourplex. So it's just trying to give flexibility so that there's more opportunities for different types of housing. And I don't believe we had any questions there where we needed guidance. This was mostly just to let you know that that's what's in there now. Okay. So this is the section on middle housing incentives. And again, some of this might be new, some of it is not new. We also tried to combine it so that it was in a more like suitable location, which is within the code. So we kind of changed some things around organizationally. This language starts, I believe, on page 22. And we do have some questions in here. There is currently a bonus or an increase for building coverage and hard surface coverage. Those coverage maximums can be increased by 10%. And right now the language applies both to, as an incentive, if somebody wants to take an existing single family home, retain it, and convert it or expand it or add to it to develop a middle housing type. It also currently applies to new middle housing types, so duplex, triplex, fourplex. The question here is, should that bonus only apply to middle housing conversions that preserve an existing home, or is it also appropriate to allow them for new middle housing types? I will say that if you're trying to encourage middle housing, allowing some additional building and hard surface coverage helps, because it gives people more flexibility to do something like a triplex or fourplex. So that's one question. There's also some language in there about providing front and rear setback flexibility, so that if you're doing a middle housing type, you can reduce your setbacks by 5 to 10 feet. And when you see numbers in brackets like they're represented in the code amendments in this packet, that means there's a choice there. You know, is it a 5-foot reduction? Is it a 10-foot reduction? Is it somewhere in between? That's another place where we need some additional guidance to get the final draft language ready. So those standards are in there, and then there's a couple of options for additional parameters that we could put on that we've talked about with staff. One is that if you reduce a front setback, for example, you need to have a reciprocal increase of your rear setback, or if you reduce a rear setback, you have to have a reciprocal increase in your front setback. So the idea is that, you know, you're not allowing more footprint, you're just sort of providing some flexibility on how the building footprint can move around on the lot. Another option is that reduced setbacks can be allowed, but they need to be linked to tree preservation. So if you're trying to preserve a tree that's on the site, then you can use these reduced setbacks. Or if you are trying to preserve some sort of other natural amenity, then you can use these reduced setbacks. So I think the question there is, do we want this setback flexibility tied to one of these options? Should they just be allowed outright? Should it be both options? Should it be one or the other? So I think there's some, you know, some nuance that needs to be worked out there. And then I'd mentioned the density bonus. That hasn't changed since I think several drafts ago. So that's still there. So if you do middle housing, you can have up to a 40% density bonus if you are near a regional trail or transit, and up to 20% if you are not. Thoughts or discussions there? Or Dave, anything that you wanted to add? I know that was like 2 or 3 questions all lumped into one.
I'm going to suggest that we take them one at a time. So going to the lot coverage, and just give a little more background on where this came from. Basically, when we did the corner lot duplexes, we added this language. We conditioned the lot coverage bonus to conversions of existing homes where setbacks were non-conforming. So we allowed expanding along that non-conforming line, not getting any closer in terms of the setback, and along with that, increase the building and hard surface coverage. And this is partly an option that we wanted to give Planning Commission to be responsive to some of the criticism that we've gotten in the public comments, that these new middle housing, the new middle housing would be larger than existing single-family houses, when our starting point was that middle housing is on the same scale as single family, that fits within the single family building envelope. So in both cases, these are attempts to address those concerns, and also with the condition for preserving trees or creating new landscape or rain garden features, that sort of natural amenities, to address the concern that this will lead to reduction in tree canopy. So just to keep it focused, if you could weigh in on the hard surface, making that conditional, as we did with the corner lot duplexes first, and then get into setbacks.
Thank you. If we could stop the share.
Oh, sure.
Excellent. All right, commissioners, any thoughts about the impervious coverage? Commissioner Westerbeck.
Commissioner Westerbeck here. I don't think it needs to be conditional. We really, in my opinion, need to be using our land much more efficiently. 10% is pretty minor, and so if it means it's the difference between getting an extra unit or making a missing middle project work, say it's a 3,000 square foot footprint, that's a pretty good size building. Most houses aren't even that big unless they're a really big house. If they're 2 or 3 stories, it's extra 300 square feet. It's not much. I don't think most people, and I very much understand the complaints. We get the letters. We understand the critiques. I don't think most people have noticed 300 square feet very much, or just as to use that example. And we really, need to start more efficiently using the land where we're a very low density city, and so I think it would be useful to just allow it across the board. My understanding of the Minneapolis situation, they were one of the first, or the first city in the United States to do I'll start allowing triplexes on all single-family zones. One of the things holding back their housing production and people using those new codes is they didn't change setbacks, heights, lot coverage, and stuff. It was kept exactly the same as single-family houses. And while the spirit of Missing Middle is residential friendly, they're often a little bit bigger, but often not much that someone would notice. So I'm for allowing it in all situations.
Thank you. Other commissioners? Commissioner Kiernan, Chair Kiernan.
Commissioner tonight. Excuse me. How are we addressing the runoff management with the additional coverage?
The regulations for runoff, green infrastructure, those would all remain the same. They would still, development would still have to handle its stormwater runoff on site or make provisions for addressing it.
So additional coverage would drive the need for larger stormwater management facilities.
Potentially, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Can we put that language back up, please? I seem to have lost it, and I want to make sure I'm understanding what the coverage issue is. It seems like, I don't disagree that most people wouldn't notice 300 square feet, but I just want to make sure I'm recalling the language correctly before I comment.
Do you want the language that was on the slide or the language that's in the draft amendments?
Yeah, can you just point me to it in the draft amendment?
Yes. Let's see. Page 22. Let me get there.
5D2, I think.
Yeah, page 22, 5D.
II, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And that language in 5D is specific to when middle housing is created by retaining or renovating an existing unit. There is additional language under 7C at the top of page 23 that is for new duplex, triplex, and fourplex development. So it's kind of in 2 places.
I'll weigh in here. I'm in general favor of allowing more flexibility, especially for conversions. That makes intuitive sense. Trying to keep an existing dwelling unit would take a lot of changes to make sure that it can become middle housing type. In terms of 7C, I think it also makes intuitive sense because given the strength of stormwater management code, commensurate increases in impervious surface coverage, hard surfaces like roofs, driveways, and sidewalks have to be offset by increasingly larger infiltration systems, rain gardens, or other management techniques that take up a lot of footprint for larger spaces. So it makes sense to me as a stormwater professional that the increase in impervious coverage of 10% is marginal. It could make or break a project for someone who's looking to convert their home into say a duplex. And they would have to meet the requirements of the stormwater code to offset any increase in their impervious surface coverage if that was necessary. So I'm in favor of both. Commissioner Anders.
I'm in favor of both as well. The part I missed was the 10% limitation. And I wanted to make sure I saw that in there because, 300, 500, whatever, square feet doesn't make a difference. I just wanted to make sure that there was some kind of limitation on it. So it certainly makes sense to me, and I think the flexibility will be a benefit. So I'm in favor as well.
Yes, Commissioner Robson.
I agree with the other commissioners who've spoken previously, that I think that this gives a little bit of flexibility without significant detriments on the other side. So I'm in favor of including, I'm in favor of changing it to that.
Great. Shall we move on to the next question?
Do you want me to bring the screen back up, or do you? I think the next question has to do with the setbacks. So if you would just want to.
So, and there's two setback issues. Should we allow a reduction setback with a commensurate increase on the other side? So basically should it be conditioned on keeping the same footprint? Number one, and number two, should it be conditioned on either preserving trees or creating some new natural amenity?
Commissioner Kiernan, is that a hand?
Sure, I was
Okay.
pondering, but I really like the idea of incentivizing preserving or creating amenities. So I strongly favor that. And I guess I'm okay with moving the buffers around as long as it nets out. But the preservation or enhancement of tree cover or amenities, I think is something we ought to look to encourage.
Commissioner Anders, did I see your hand too?
Yeah, I agree with the conditioning it on preserving trees and other natural things, trees, whatever. But could there be other good reasons for adjustments in the setback other than natural resources that I think we're not thinking of, but it's probably just me because I'm newer to this than probably everybody else. But are we forgetting something? Are we making it more difficult if there are no trees that we're trying to preserve? Could there be another good reason for wanting to, increase or adjust the setback? And we might be discouraging development in some way by not factoring in those considerations.
I do know that with middle housing development, sometimes existing front setbacks in single family zones do create a bit of a barrier and make middle housing development challenging, particularly if the front setback is like 20 feet. So, I mean, that's certainly something that I've heard from developers. And so again, you know, the intent of this setback reduction is to provide that flexibility for these additional housing types. I think particularly front setbacks can be challenging.
And are we saying we're only allowing that flexibility if it's to preserve some natural resources?
Well, I think that's the question that we're trying to understand here is, yeah, should those setback adjustments be allowed outright, or should they be linked to tree preservation?
So we did discuss other options to tree preservation, and we did add some language to allow it for a situation where somebody created so if you have a lot that doesn't have any existing trees to preserve, could you create a grove of a certain type and dimension, and also take advantage of this flexibility? So we did put that in there. The other one we discussed was where a site is constrained by wetland buffers or steep slope buffers, whether this would apply. But there, the setbacks really don't apply. The normal setbacks, the rear setback doesn't apply, and so the wetland buffer itself becomes the constraint, and a project needs to comply with those in any case. But we could consider allowing a reduced setback when there are critical areas, buffers that would push a development towards one side of the lot or the other.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kurd. Sarah Gustafson here. So I have two questions, and my first question is, what is the status of our current tree canopy code?
Well, we do have protections for preserving percentage of significant trees, and there have been suggestions that we should beef up those provisions, and that's been in the docket, but to date it hasn't been initiated as a work item.
Sarah Gustafson here. I think I would be more willing to go with this outright coverage increase if we could link it with bringing our tree canopy code up to scratch. And I don't know whether it's possible to link it to this code amendment.
I would say it's outside of the scope of this code amendment. That's a very significant piece of work in itself.
Included as a finding to go along with it? I don't know.
Commissioner Robson.
Thank you. Like many other commissioners, I'm interested in, preserving tree and other natural amenities. What really drew me is I really like the language in this, that we're allowing not only to preserve significant trees or natural amenities, but to create them. And I think in that way we can allow and incentivize developers who really need maybe a certain setback in order for their building to work, to then get creative about what natural amenities can they add so that they qualify for these kinds of benefits. So what makes sense to me would be to allow reductions with equal increase or decrease in setbacks, as well as side to side, unless where they're doing it to preserve or create a natural amenity, in which case they do not need to balance it on the other side. And in that way, we are encouraging them, if they want to get the most use of their land, they need to be creating natural amenities, which of course, I mean, at least from my perspective, would increase the value of their property anyway. So I just wanted to put that on the table as a suggestion. Thank you.
I think most commissioners, oh, yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Westerbeck.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in with what Sarah brought up about front setbacks in my work. I agree, they are the most challenging to deal with, and they often are the thing that can break a small lot project. So I really appreciate what you said, and I kind of wonder if, I'm thinking about some of the experientially best old neighborhoods that a lot of Missing Middle is based on. They often have buildings that are either zero lot line or just 5 feet off or so off the front sidewalk. And so not only might we get a more people-oriented, friendly, walkable street if we allow for some shorter front setbacks, but we might also get more housing. So I'm kind of wondering if on front alone, and we wouldn't necessarily have to apply this to the rear or the sides, if we have, say, a minimum of 5 feet, and we make it, instead of changing it by 5 or 10 feet, blanket, because like you said, if it's 20 feet, which we often have because of driveway aprons or front setbacks in the code right now, I know it's different in the downtown sub-area code, that we just say 5 feet, and it's going to likely be landscaped or something like that. That's also going to mean it's not going to be a driveway, which that means a curb cut. So it's going to incentivize, again, a more like a front porch, front stoop sort of development instead of a driveway apron or something. So we might actually get better development, more friendly neighborhood development with that as well, the kind that people generally like in studies of what people prefer in their neighborhood. So new urbanism kind of. So I just wanted to put that out there. Maybe if there's a way for us, and I don't mean to change the code hugely tonight, but if front could have a special exception that could be down to 5 with one of these incentives, maybe we want to consider that.
I will weigh in, and so tonight's packet is fun to look back on some of the comment and the history of our deliberations over time, and I recognize that I never gave my Portland Middle Housing examples from the field presentation. It's on page 39, but one of the middle housing cottage court or clusters that I visited probably back in winter, there's snow on the ground in the picture, so, is kind of built around these historic, or it's built around this grove of trees that were preserved on the site, native trees that were preserved on the site, and would have otherwise been removed as part of like a traditional short plat, kind of normal single family build. And so I think that regulations can incentivize the saving of green space and natural resources and amenities. I also think that the development of rain gardens and other low-impact design, green stormwater techniques do also require a lot of flexibility, and that's something that the Commission has thought a lot about, is how can we make sure that the code isn't the restriction on good things that people want for their properties and for their neighborhoods in the city. And so from that, I agree with the consensus that's sort of been shared from the other commissioners, and that we need the flexibility. I like the idea of tying it to natural amenities and maybe not making that reciprocal when it is tied as in Section 5E2. Are there any other comments on this? I guess the other consideration is if we're trying to move forward with these amendments, one of the considerations that we need to make is, are these manageable by our community development department? And so when we say such reduction is allowed when necessary to preserve significant trees, which is defined in our code, or create other natural amenities on the lot, is that at the discretion of the community development director? Or, like it has been said this evening, is there a list somewhere? So I think that we would need to define that a little bit more clearly. And I'd be interested to hear from Senior Planner Boyd about the enforceability and any trips in the department.
Well, we did get some feedback from our development review staff on that, and that's where in the code we actually did put in some specifications for a particular type. The code does include different types of landscaping, so we said specific site and gave the commission a range of dimensions of that. So, and I would say that I think they go hand in hand, the reciprocal and the preserving trees, because basically if you're going to be preserving a tree, needing to adjust setbacks to preserve a tree, that what this would do is allow you to push it towards the other side of the lot, either front or back. Since side setbacks are already fairly small, it probably is going to apply primarily to front and back setbacks.
I thought what I heard, though, from a couple people was that as an incentive for middle housing development, we should allow these flexibility in setbacks regardless of tree protection. But if they're not protecting trees, they have to do the reciprocal sort of adjustments. If they are protecting trees, then they can have flexible setbacks and they don't need to have reciprocal adjustments. Is that what I heard?
I'm seeing some nodding of heads, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's an either or, but not necessarily a both. That was what I understood.
Yeah. And
okay.
And I guess what I'm saying is that you're going to get the reciprocal either because the tree is likely going to increase the setback on one side, and then you get it reduced on the other. So, I think we can move on. Also, I'm realizing that we have a couple of attendees that wanted to, or 3 attendees that wanted to speak, and so maybe if we can kind of have this high-level discussion or a little higher level, and then we'll get into the details when we go through the code page by page. Then we can kind of finish the presentation and the initial discussion, and then open it up for public comment.
Agreed. Thank you.
So keep moving is what I'm hearing? Okay. So one thing that is new in this draft that wasn't there in July are new like development site layout standards for cottage housing and courtyard housing. Both of those housing types are kind of very specifically defined by how they are laid out on a site. And so in order to sort of account for that, we added language starting on page 24. Most of the language is focused around, for both cottage and courtyard housing, most of the language is focused around open space and kind of where and how open space is provided on the site and how the building or buildings interact with the open space. And then there's also for both some provisions around parking and where parking can be located. Again, really specific sort of types of site layouts for these 2 particular developments. So I think the questions there are the open space provisions appropriate? And you'll probably also notice that there's lots of number ranges in brackets, which again represent a choice where we're trying to understand, what's the most suitable requirement here. Most of the brackets have to do with the amount of open space being required, dimensions of the open space, and in the case of cottages, how much of the cottages have to abut that shared open space. So I don't know. Yeah, maybe we don't want to get into that level of detail now, Dave. I guess we could look for specific numbers, or what we could ask is, kind of within these ranges, where do we want to lean? Do we want to lean towards less? Do we want to lean towards more? I guess that would be one way to look at it. Or do we want to hit it right in the middle? And then we can take it from there. But yeah, Dave, how do you want to manage that?
And we can get into the more detailed discussion. But
Okay.
if there are any questions about the approach that commissioners would like to ask now, this would be a good time, and then we can move on to more detailed discussion as we go through the code.
Sure.
I can't see if anyone on Zoom has questions, but
I don't see any.
all right, let's keep moving.
All right. So there are amendments having to do with accessory dwelling units. Those start on page 26. Some of these are not new. They were part of the last packet, the last couple of packets. We did make some changes based on some feedback. Right now, where the language is up to 2 ADUs are allowed per single family detached lot. One of those ADUs has to be attached. The other one can be detached, but the way the code reads now, you wouldn't be able to have 2 detached ADUs on a single family lot. 1 ADU per other type of residential unit. So that would be, 1 ADU per duplex unit, 1 ADU per triplex unit. I think the question here is, do we want to also allow ADUs for multifamily units other than townhomes? And correct me if I'm wrong here, Dave, but did we already sort of address or answer the question about whether or not ADUs should be allowed for townhomes? Is that why I'm not remembering the specifics around that conversation.
The approach, we've actually gotten requests from townhome owners that would like to create ADUs. So we were trying to allow that, and townhome is a term that could apply to certain middle housing types, but it also could apply to a multifamily
Right.
type, 5
Okay.
or more units. So that's why we're saying, asking the question of whether we should just limit ADUs for multifamily to townhome type.
Understood. Okay. And then just a quick note about parking, that right now your code requires 1 additional parking space for an ADU, and that parking requirement can be waived if on-street parking is available and the development is close to a regional trail or transit. And by close, I think we have a half mile radius.
Half mile. And I will note that one of the comments we got was a comment that it should be a half-mile walking radius, because some of those radii go beyond rivers or freeways. And we've discussed that and agreed to that, but I did miss it in one place. So I've inserted the walking distance in both places where that's referenced.
Okay.
And the waiver would be new.
Oh, is that new since July?
Well, no, it'd be new in these code amendments.
Oh, gotcha.
We have been talking about that, but.
Questions or thoughts there before I move on?
Commissioner Gustafson?
Hi, Sarah Gustafson here, and I noticed that Commissioner Robson might also have a question. I don't see the code subsection that refers to on-street parking. Right now, I see on page 26, number 4, only that it to waive the parking requirement, you need to be close to transit, and I am fine with that, and not including the extra condition, but I wanted to make sure that we're on the same page before moving forward.
No, you're right. That language is not in there because that's where that's where it would be. So I think that either is that must be an oversight because I mean we had the conversation. I know that we intended to add that. Dave, was there? Am I forgetting something? Was there a reason why we didn't, or did we just forget?
I was thinking that we had added it, but so.
I was too.
It's certainly a question then for Planning Commission. We're hearing from one commissioner that they're okay with not having it in there, but when we get into the code language, we can discuss that.
Okay. Others before I move on?
Are there anyone on
Thank you.
Zoom?
I'm not seeing anyone.
Okay.
Yeah,
Commissioner Gustafson?
Sarah Gustafson here. I think we should revisit the parking requirement when we get to the code section because there's been some discussion among the commission that we should waive it even if the ADU, the new ADU is farther than a half mile away from transit. I don't know how I feel about that, but I would like to have a debate where we come to some conclusion.
I think that
I do see a hand up from Carter. Is that a commissioner or is that
Yeah,
somebody?
It's one of our attendees, and
are we?
let's wait until I think we should wait until we take public comment, but why don't we try to move through the presentation fairly quickly and get to the public comment.
Sure. I think there's just a couple. Oh, this is the last one, actually. This is not new, but I just wanted to put it up there because I don't know that we talked about it. And I just wanted to remind people that we did implement new minimum parking requirements for all of the new middle housing types. And this is where they currently stand. So duplexes would require a total of 3 spaces, triplexes 4 spaces, fourplexes would require 5 spaces, and cottage and courtyard housing would require 1 space per unit.
So the proposal is basically 1 per unit plus 1 for the duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes.
Yeah.
And that's
okay.
That's down from the current 2.2 spaces in the code. And then, so I'll just really quickly recap what I reported on last time about the middle housing implementation grant. We're still in the process of getting that contract finalized, but that will allow us to do more work on how we can implement this, how we can educate the public more about it, to do some analysis on with a racial equity lens, particularly around potential displacement and anti-displacement strategies that we might want to consider. So that will all be moving forward. And this is something that's kind of been missing when we've made accessory housing amendments in the past. We've made the amendments and then just waited for the applicants to come to us, and we realized that there's more work needed to facilitate these new housing types. So with that, I think the next slide is the recommended action. But before we get, I guess the first thing should have been a bullet for public testimony. And I appreciate Mr. Carter, your patience. And since you did put your hand up, if you can unmute.
If we could,
your testimony. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, so basically real quick, going over the notes and things that you guys have mentioned, I would appreciate going and seeing you incentivize the natural trees and landscapes as far as the buffer zones. I've got a big cedar on my property. I think it's a wonderful tree and it takes up a whole lot of water. Also, I would prefer not to go and see any waivers put on for property as far as parking onto the allowances for the ADUs. I work in the Seattle area. It's horrible in the residential areas to go and try to get through. I don't want to go and end up with cluttered residential streets in Bothell where traffic, bicyclers, and pedestrians can't get through. The other thing that I'm concerned about on the proposal is that if you go to the Portland proposal on how they do ADUs, they describe it as by footprint of the area of the structure that's built, not by the total square footage of the unit. Your limitation at 1,000 square foot, I think, is too limiting. If you go to like Architects Northwest and just look up ADU, they actually have a 1,200 square foot model there that would actually fit very nicely on a lot of properties. But at 1,200 square foot, it's too large for the Bothell plan, which is kind of bad when you consider that that's just a Woodinville property just a few miles down the road, going into doing the business for designs. The other thing I go and I see is that you have a limit on your ADU that's about 500 or 150 square foot, which I think is really ridiculously small. That's my shed. And I would go and I'd hate to go and put anyone in that. I would prefer to go and see an ADU that's at least 400 square foot as a minimum. I would like to go and see the size put up around 1,500 to 2,000 square foot with a footprint that goes no more than, I would say, somewhere around 30 by 40 square foot or 30 by 40 feet in dimensions. So that way that the land is preserved, we maximize the amount of occupancy that can be put into the area. And instead of going and putting in long, flat housing that takes up land, we can go vertical, make use of the 35-foot ceiling, and make a better downtown and residential area. That's basically it. Hopefully I made it within 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Dave, do you want to clarify some of those standards that he was mentioning, or do you want me to do that? I heard some things that I don't think are in the code, but
Yeah,
I don't
the
know if
150 and 400 limits, I don't believe are there. So basically, the current limit on ADUs is 800 square feet. We're increasing that to 1,000 square feet. And we're also, well, we're keeping a provision that allows, say, if you have a house with a 1,200 square foot footprint and a daylight basement, you can get apply for an exception to allow converting the full basement area to an ADU. The idea behind limiting the area is to keep them relatively smaller and relatively more affordable. We're applying the same 1,000 square foot limit for cottages. And now that we are allowing middle housing, if you want to do a larger unit, larger than 1,000 square foot, you can do it as a duplex or a middle housing type. There are no size limits on the middle housing types other than ADUs and cottages.
Actually, I stand corrected. It's about the shared space. That's the minimum of 150 to 400 square feet. Section 1214.134, page 24.
sorry, where are you looking?
I think this is under item B, cottage housing, number 2, shared open space, letter A. The bracketed numbers are undecided, but that is a general range in which we can weigh in on. So,
Yeah. So I was just stating that it is correct. I made a mistake. That is not on the area of the structure. It's actually that of the open shared space.
great. Thank you for that comment, and thanks for weighing in and being so patient.
So we also have with hand raised Ann Agard, and looks like she was able to join the Zoom meeting. So I'm going to allow her to speak. And Ms. Agard, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can, thanks.
Okay. Yes, I have 3 comments which I sent to you earlier today as an email, so I hope you have all gotten them. So I will just summarize these quickly. The first one relates to the distance from transit and regional trail access. I'm delighted to hear that you left out by accident the walking provision, but I would still like to see this reduced to 1/4 mile from transit or regional trail. And the reason for this is that this does not get you to your destination. You're simply to the regional trail itself. And that I feel that 1/4 mile, recognizing the difficulty of getting to that regional trail with few bridges and major highways is a reasonable amount. And it also is because this trail is not illuminated after dark. And once we get into the dark season, you've got, it's not a safe place to be. So 1/4 mile, thank you for the walking. The second thing has not been discussed since an early comment by the consultant about easy access on one floor. And I believe this was in a place in Oregon. And I would very much like to see this provision added to the code amendment. And there were a number of planning commissioners who found this also very favorable. So I suggest that it would be a positive to make it for ability of people of all abilities, particularly elderly people, to use the middle housing facilities. And finally, this impervious coverage, where you've had a lot of discussion about the 10%, the 20%, and the 40% impervious surface coverage increases. I ask that be not allowed within the shoreline management area, which is the 200 feet from the ordinary high water mark, from the Sammamish River, and from North Creek, that are all covered under the Shoreline Master Program. It is my belief that it would not meet the no net loss of ecological functions for either ADUs or the multiple housing provision, and this should not be allowed. And I gave a specific section where it could possibly be added, but you may have a better area where you could add that prohibition against accessory dwelling units or a multifamily duplex and triplexes and fourplexes within the Shoreline Master Program jurisdiction. Thank you. Have you got any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Agard. Thanks for your comment and for being patient while we worked through the meeting. Are there any more commenters on Zoom?
We do have one attendee here in person.
Awesome.
So you can go up to the podium for your comments. Let me make sure that it's...
I think it's working. My name is Justin Buffard. I was here last week. The topic of about 11 out of the 60 minutes was my lot. Sort of the main thing I saw effectively is still always going to be about parking in the end. It really is. I gave, I think, pretty clear and convincing evidence that not all places are equal. If you're living on Bothell Way, you know, where the BCU is in Amaro, like, I get it, right? Like, there's definitely limited street parking there. But we have really, really large rights of way, at least on West Hill, and they're just empty all the time. I understand what it's like to be in downtown Seattle. I sometimes have to go to a friend's house that's in Ballard. I know what Mr. Carter meant when he meant that the streets are crowded. But we also have to remember that it's not going to be all multifamily zones really tightly packed or whatever. This opens up options to add middle housing within single-family developments, and in the single-family developments, you're still expected to have fairly big rights of way and easy places to park. I just don't see it turning into a Ballard or Shoreline or whatever. And I know what it's like to drive between those two lanes of cars, and it's really tight. And I have actually depth perception issues, so I understand the limitation there. I just don't think that we need to paint like where Amaro is in the same brush as where West Hill is, where there's literally a giant open farm there, if you know where the white farm is, the white fenced farm is. So that's why in the last meeting, Commissioner Gustafson mentioned, you know, if you have some way of maybe defining or even not defining adequate street parking, maybe you can waive it for waive the parking for ADUs. it should just, I think context matters, and going to the least sort of common denominator can limit options where, honestly, we have so much, try to give a quick story. At first I believed when my computer has a lot of free memory, I thought that was a great thing. I thought I had a lot of room to do more work. But then I went to Microsoft and I talked to a person who put in a feature that intentionally fills that memory. And I'm like, what are you doing? Now these computers have no free memory. And he told me something that changed my mindset on this. He said, unused memory is wasted memory. It's like having a big drafting table and then having a filing cabinet over there and saying, oh, I should leave a lot of room in my drafting table because, it's good to have a lot of room, and then having to walk over to the filing cabinet and get it. It's wasted space. And in this case, we have, at least in West Hill, a lot of room to park. It's just not the same as Bothell Way and stuff. So I get where he's coming from, but where I live, yeah, it's not a problem, and these parking restrictions might limit my ability to convert my garage, even though literally nobody parks there overnight. I'm going to try to get through a few of the things that were talked about really quickly. Stormwater. When I built my garage, I had to do quite a bit of. I had to do a stormwater plan, which was effectively a nice dry well, and that was signed off on. I don't think 10% would have changed anything for my stormwater management plan. We have these big Schedule 40 pipes or whatever. I think 10%, like Commissioner Westerbeck said, was reasonably marginal. Let's see. I think corner lot duplexes have been downgraded a little bit with these proposed code amendments, and it's a little bit. I find the single family attached definition to be a little bit strange. I'm not really sure what it means. I have a duplex that's a very traditional side-by-side duplex in Monroe, and I gotta wonder, is that a single family attached or is it a duplex? I don't know. Yeah, so we removed the option of ADUs being possibly a duplex. In my case, I'm on a corner lot. Could I have converted my garage into a second livable unit and call that a corner lot duplex? I don't know if that's single family attached. I don't know if that's an ADU. I don't know what it means to renovate an existing building into a duplex, for example, in my case. So I think corner lot duplexes have been sort of maybe downgraded a little bit. And then, I also have an option in my particular home where I could have made two attached separate ADUs. It's not two attached ADUs. It just wasn't clear why we did. Okay, you can have one attached and one attached. I'm not sure why the distinction is there. I have a configuration in my home where there's a 400 square foot room that could easily be a very nice studio, and I have the garage that's 20 by 24 by 30 and a 10 by 10 mudroom, so 800 square feet. I could do a 2-bedroom unit there. So I could have turned it into 2 ADUs, but because they're both attached, I can't do it. I probably won't, but I'm just saying, I just didn't know where the distinction came from. For parking, I don't have a dog in this fight, but multifamily kind of gets screwed over. They're still on the 2+ versus the 1+ extra. So the multifamily, again, I don't care as much, but I'm just saying they're still getting the old rules. And I'm just making sure I covered everything. The reciprocal setbacks. Well, one, I really wish that the side setbacks were just set to 5. That didn't happen. It's not a hill I can die on, but I just, again, think it's weird because in some cases you could have 5 and then 15 on one side, and then the other side does the same thing. So you have 30 feet between the two buildings and 10 on the other side. It's just weird. I just don't get it. And as far as reciprocality, I can understand that you just want to move the building around, but I also felt that some of these multifamily buildings, like duplex, triplex, whatever, do have a slightly bigger footprint, and it would have been nice to have more buildable land.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm over 3 minutes.
Thank you so much for your comments, and thanks for being patient and and waiting through our presentation. Thanks so much for coming. All right. So at this time, I think we'll walk through with deliberations a little bit more, especially on the sections that we haven't deliberated over, which I believe started with the 10-lot unit threshold, or was it cottage housing?
Would you like to go to the actual code language and just work through the page by page?
I think that's reasonable. Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. And I think it's good to go ahead and start with that while we have Sarah Breakstone with us until 8, and then we can deal with the findings at the end.
Do you want me to share screen again and pull the code up, or were you going to do that, or?
Why don't you?
Or maybe we don't need to do it if everybody's got it in front of them.
Well, why don't you go ahead and pull it up, and we can toggle back and forth, and what I'll do is I'll have a Word version of it up so I can make some changes on the fly as we discuss.
At this time,
Okay.
if I agree that this is probably the best way to proceed, but if Commissioner Anders or Commissioner Kiernan have a question, please just jump in because I can't see you on the screen right now. So thank you.
I also see that, oh, never mind. She's gone. Okay, can you all see this now?
Yeah.
I'll see if I can. Let me get back to, nope, too far. I don't think there was anything under the definitions that we needed to talk about. Is that right? I'm just going to scroll down until I get to where I think the first question lies, which is,
Right. Yes, page 22.
okay. Is this in the, I know this, not in the order of the slides as they were presented, but in the order of the code, I think this is where we have the first question. Is this right, Dave?
That's correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want me to walk through it again or just let people absorb and comment?
We all have the questions in front of us if we're all on
Okay.
the same page of the packet, 22.
I'll
Please.
just mute myself and let you guys talk then.
They're at the top of page 22. Oh, they are, yeah. So we're discussing right now these three questions. How far should setbacks be allowed to be reduced? 2, should reductions be conditioned on preserving and or creating natural amenities? And 3, is there support for the natural amenity description in number 3 below? Commissioner Gustafson?
Sarah Gustafson here. I think we came to a consensus. The hard part is translating that into legal wording. So my question for Sarah Breakstone is, do you want us to wordsmith it between us, or do you want to put the words out there and then we can say, yes, that's what we were thinking, or no, that's a little bit off? What would be the best way to proceed?
I think you can just tell us what what the intent that you're looking for is here, and we can worry about the language and translate that into the code language. And I guess I'm not sure that I heard a consensus when we talked about it the first time. I don't know if we need additional conversation, but yeah, you can just tell us what you want us to do, and we'll worry about the specific language.
Okay, Commissioner.
Wasn't it that we agreed that setbacks would be, reduction would be allowed, period, across the board? And if you're reducing the setback to preserve trees and natural amenities, then you wouldn't have to have a corresponding change in the setback on the back. Right?
We're seeing a lot of nodding heads here. Yep, that was generally
Okay.
the consensus is yes, definitely number 1, and number 2, under E2, the setbacks would not need to be reciprocal with natural
If they're
amenities.
preserving a tree.
If they're preserving a tree or with natural amenities, creating natural amenities. Yep.
Okay.
Commissioner, oh, sorry, Sarah, did you have something?
I just want to clarify.
Mhm.
So for the building coverage and the hard surface coverage increases, the consensus was to go ahead and allow those because we want to provide that flexibility. So that's one piece. And then for the setbacks, we want to allow the flexibility with the reciprocal setback adjustments, unless they're preserving a tree, in which case they can have setback adjustments and they don't need to be reciprocal. So those two things is what we're moving forward.
Preserving trees or creating other natural amenities.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, we're seeing
Got
a lot
it.
of nodding heads
Okay.
here too. Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I hear a couple of people who want to add some comments. So we'll start with Commissioner Gustafson, then Commissioner Robson, and then I heard Commissioner Kiernan.
Sarah Gustafson here. Apologies, did we determine in code section 5E whether we want it to be 5 feet or 10 feet?
That was my next question.
Sounds like that was also Commissioner Robson's question. Did you have something to add to that, Commissioner Robson?
I just remembered that Commissioner Westerbeck mentioned that it should be a minimum of 5 feet. So as opposed to having the increased setback be adjusted either 5 feet or 10 feet in one direction, we just say it can be adjusted with a minimum of 5 feet of frontage. And then maybe we could do the same in the back with a minimum of whatever, allowing them to adjust as necessary, as to take whatever space they needed within these, granting minimum in the front and the back. And 5 feet seems certainly reasonable to me in the front. I'm not sure what considerations we would need to make for the back in that case, but I think that might be one way to approach it that I would agree with.
Commissioner Kiernan, did you have a comment, or is that kind of a separate?
No, I was agreeing with Commissioner Anders' characterization.
Okay.
In particular, talking about the amenities, either existing or I'll say constructed.
Excellent. Okay, yeah, we are definitely at consensus there with the amenities. We like those amenities. So, Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thank you. I want to concur with Commissioner Robson that that you had my thoughts right. 5 foot minimum at the front, I would imagine. I know that for example, in our downtown sub-area code, the downtown transition has 5 feet on front, sides, and back. And that seems to work pretty well. I think that zone personally should be 0 lot line, but that's not a discussion for tonight at all, because it's downtown. Here, though, it seems appropriate. And I'm going from memory. I thought we at some point discussed a reduction down to a possible 3 foot setback on the sides, which the IRC and IBC allow for fire if you do a 1 hour rated wall, which wouldn't be an unusual thing for a more dense housing type. Did I imagine that, or did we ever talk about being allowed to reduce to 3 feet? So I've had some residential projects where we could do that as long as we did the 1 hour rated wall, fire rated wall.
I guess we never heard any degree of consensus from the commission on that. It would be allowed a total of 6 foot separation between buildings on a site per fire code.
Right.
But we have not.
I just couldn't remember. Yeah. I brought it up because I know someone else mentioned it in one of the resident feedback letters that we received, and I thought, oh, I do remember talking about that. So she might have been looking at an older draft or something, and there's a lot of text, and I do read the packet, but I'd forgotten if we, like you said, if we'd resolved that. That might be a suggestion I would look at. I don't need to throw a monkey wrench in it tonight, but I wanted to bring that up since I thought we had discussed it at one point. Yeah, and 5 foot on the front, and then I like the idea of missing middle allowing 5 feet on all sides as an absolute minimum, or even 3 on the sides. But because, as Commissioner Curd said, we're going to run up against, well, of course, those might be somewhat in conflict. Well, no, they shouldn't be, but they'll be offset by lot coverage and impervious surface coverage, structural coverage issues, as well as stormwater, LAD. I think the city still requires low impact development to be looked at first for stormwater. So naturally, one of those things is going to govern. So there might be a situation where that 5 feet would be used. So anyway, I think a 5 foot minimum would be a good clause, a good minimum for this.
Any other feedback on this item? I would concur that a minimum of 5 feet is a reasonable reduction there.
So, okay, because the way it's worded now, it's a reduction of 5 to 10 feet.
That's correct, yep.
And so what we're saying is take it all the way down to a
Reduced
5 foot setback.
To 5 feet.
Reduce to 5 feet. Okay,
Minimum.
Correct. Yeah, minimum, right.
minimum on all sides or just in the front?
I mean, my suggestion would be all sides, because
Right.
I think that allows for at least fire protection, and we're trying to do more with the land in this with these code settings or these code amendments. So that was the thought behind it.
That takes, I guess would that take away the sort of reciprocal increases on other sides though?
No.
So
No,
they could
that's-
go down to 5 feet on the front, but they couldn't also go down to 5 feet on the back.
Right. It just allows you to move the building around more.
Okay.
You got more latitude. So maybe they do need to put
Okay.
parking in the back or something like that. They say, well, we want to push it to the front. We're going to have a nice porch or something like that, and that also allows, for example, parking to be a little closer if necessary. So sometimes parking can't be in the setback depending on the code we're looking at, part of the code we're looking at. So it just gives more leeway for a project to be feasible.
Okay. And just, sorry, just one more point of clarification. So your front setbacks in these zones are 20 feet. So if you allowed them to reduce down to 5 in the front, would they have to, in theory, add 15 feet to their rear setback to offset that?
I think the consensus of the commission was yes,
Okay.
yes, unless they are able to build a natural amenity or they are preserving a
Or
significant
preserve
tree
a tree. Okay.
that has perhaps grown, and now they need to.
Okay.
Right. So my comment would have muddled that. I'm sorry, by saying if they had parking out back. But of course, that's not a structure, so I guess it does apply. Never mind. I'll shut up now.
All right. I think I've got it. Thank you.
Great. Let's move on to the next question. Here it is. These questions are
Yes.
about density bonus.
Actually, one other thing under 5E III, so the amenity that's when you're not preserving a tree, you're creating an amenity. Do we require a 5 or a 10-foot wide type 5 landscape strip? Just to be specific about what that created natural amenity should be. My inclination would be, suggestion would be that if we're allowing a reduction of up to 15 feet, we should go at least 10 feet with the.
Does that create any issues with like tracking or enforcement? Because what if they put this in their backyard? Does that, if they put that 10-foot wide landscape strip in their backyard, to me, that's a really tricky thing for the city to try to track and enforce. And what's to stop them from taking it out a year later or 6 months later? I guess yeah, I don't know. That would be my concern with that provision.
Commissioner Westerbeck, do you have a comment on that? Nope. Anyone on Zoom have a comment? Any commissioners on Zoom have a comment?
Keep going then?
Well, I will make one comment. I've in permitting a lot of projects as an architect through the years, a lot of cities are employing aerial photography and satellites, GIS, and they can tell when you've added things to your yard and sheds and additions. I had a client who came to me and they had unpermitted things, and the city, as soon as someone went in, when I went in with some information, they said, "Oh, this stuff's new. It wasn't here before." The client had not told me. This is an adjacent city. So anyway, the city could police it. I think the technology might be there, but will they? And will they have the time and the staff? But just a side note that I have noticed that it can be tracked sometimes.
Yeah.
We have the same issue with trees that are preserved through a tree preservation ordinance. They're often on the rear sides of lots. So I would just say that the concern was losing tree canopy. So I think adding canopy on the backside is still a public benefit, as well as, and it also provides additional buffer to the adjacent property. So,
Okay. And I assume that type 5 landscape strip requires trees. Trees are part of that.
yes.
All right. Let's go back to here. Question about short plats and density bonuses and affordability requirements.
All right, so we're on page 23 of the packet. These two questions are, should the density bonus apply to both short plats and full subdivisions as shown in number 12 below? And the second portion of that is, should short plats that achieve 10 or more primary dwelling units through the density bonus be required to provide an affordable unit per 12.07 as shown in E below? Or would that be a disincentive to creating that middle housing in larger short plats? Commissioner Gustafson.
Sarah Gustafson here. I think we decided to exempt short plats from this code section. Let's make sure that that's the consensus. In that case, if that were the case, would we just cross subsection E out? And I would still recommend that if the same developer is doing 2 or more short plats, then we might want to impose those restrictions and threshold anyway.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we would take this out up here where it says for new short plats. Oh, no,
No, that
sorry.
still allows.
No,
So
that's the density bonus. Yeah, you're right. We would take out E
yeah.
or revise it so that short plats were not subject to the affordability requirements, if that's the direction that we're going.
And if we do that, are we gonna add a caveat that if the same developer is creating 2 or more or whatever that number is, then they are subject to affordable housing requirements, right? Maybe.
Unless that language exists already, which I thought Dave said it did earlier.
Yeah, I believe we've addressed that issue in past with changes in our processing of short plats. So that you can't skirt the long subdivision rules by doing adjacent short plats.
Okay. So to clarify, the affordability requirement will continue to be based on units, not lots. And short plats that create more than 10 units are not going to be required to provide affordable housing. Is that where we're going?
Yeah, I'm suggesting leaving E in and just adding the word not between R and subject.
Sure, we can do it that way.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thank you, Commissioner Curd. And I, I know I suggested units earlier, and then there was some discussion a while ago about the benefits of lots versus units. And I honestly got a little lost in that. So I don't want to, suggest that it needs to be units if other commissioners found the idea of units more compelling, or excuse me, separate lots more compelling. I know Senior Planner Boyd made a good point about that. Like I said, I started going in circles in my head and didn't completely follow it. It's just embarrassing because I read code for a living, but it was a little confusing to me, the benefits, or I could see the benefits of units, but the drawbacks. So if anybody had strong feelings about that, I'm willing to keep an open mind.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Sarah Gustafson here. I still am on the same topic of the same developer. My thought is, if you have one developer who might be building in 2 or 3 different short plats that are not adjacent and are scattered over the city, they're still mobilizing and they're still earning a lot of revenue. I would suggest that they should still be subject to the affordable housing requirements, even if it's not adjacent.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thank you for anticipating. And if that was the case, would it maybe be that there would have to be a time period between projects, maybe like 6 months minimum or something like that? If that were to, it seems like we start to get a little detailed. Yeah. Not that it's not a viable idea. I just want to flesh it out a little bit.
I'm gonna chime in over from the corner on that, and just put out there from staff's perspective that might be very difficult to enforce, and we'd probably want to talk with our city attorney before adding it to the code. There may be some complications there, although it is definitely something where it's like would be really nice to do, because I get where you're going with it, that they are creating several units, they just don't happen to be part of one contained review product. So if it's something that the commission's interested in us exploring, we'd probably have to come back with more information.
I would suggest that that is an implementation issue to be saved for implementation time.
It's also something we could explore in the next grant.
Great, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Rather than coming back, we can add that to the, and also get feedback from the city attorney's office before we take it to council. So but I think it would be problematic to apply requirements to disparate projects in different locations around the city and location and developments that would probably be happening at different times as well. So, but we can run it up the flagpole. Yeah.
Sarah Gustafson here. Actually, once you start talking about cost of implementation, I'm changing my mind because I think the cost benefit might not pan out. So I'm willing to withdraw it, but if you would like to study it further, that's also a very interesting topic.
And in this section in 12A, I am adding the walking distance language there. So it's suggesting that now reads that that applies to locations within a walking distance of 1/2 mile to a regional trail or transit stop.
Thanks for that clarification. Sarah, is there enough feedback here on this item to continue on, or?
I think so, yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I recognize we only have you for 10 minutes.
Okay, so this is the section of language about cottage housing and courtyard housing. And in here are several places where there are ranges where we need a singular numerical standard. So I don't know, Dave, how do you want to walk through these? Or do you want just sort of a general approach and we can figure out the numbers? How do you want to do that?
I think to the degree we can get some specific direction, that'd be good. Or, if you, I'd also like to say that there's a question in the text block above about whether we need all of the conditions. So say, for example, 2B through D are ones that may be hard to achieve on long, narrow lots, which we have a lot of in Bothell. So that's another option for the commission is you can pick and choose which of these conditions you think should apply. But let's start with the separation between cottages. 6 feet, like I said, would be what the fire department requires. 10 feet would be the standard 5-foot side setback times 2.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
Anticipating me once again. You know, I'm going to be a 6-foot person because, again, as long as it's a 1 hour rated wall, it meets the building code, which I think is perfectly sufficient for governing this. And it's a cottage development, so a little more snug setbacks and passageways and things like that can create good planning and good intimacy if well designed. And some of the most delightful places we all travel to have narrow passages between buildings, and we find it wonderful. So I'm fine with that.
Commissioner Kiernan here. I support the 6 feet as well.
I'm seeing nodding of heads here too. I think that we're good on that one.
Okay. What about the amount of open space required per cottage? So that's this range, 150 to 400. For context, Dave, what do you require for open space for like a multifamily apartment building?
I should have been prepared for that question.
Sorry, I didn't mean to spring it on you.
I think in downtown, in the downtown transition and the corridor districts, which are probably the most similar, I think it is 100 square feet, or 100 to 150 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
I think it used to be 100, right? But maybe I'm remembering something else.
I'm wondering if it was 100 and we dropped it 150 and we dropped it to 100.
Maybe so. Yeah, because when I did my project in the DN zone, it was 100, I believe. But hope I'm remembering that correctly. I'm okay with 150. I mean, more is nicer, and I think if there's space on site, a lot of builders, developers are going to probably make them larger because it's an amenity and they want to get top rent or top dollar. But by saying it can be as little as 150, say that's 10 by 15, that's pretty reasonable. It's a nice place to garden or to hang out with your friends. So, and if it makes if it gives us an extra housing unit or two, and people are, cottage communities are really, really, really popular. They when they go on the market, they sell quickly and they resell quickly. So I don't think anybody's gonna, unless it's really, really poorly designed, gonna find that to be a sticking point if they were to want to live in that community.
Other commissioners?
And these are per unit in the shared open space, so it wouldn't be a single 150 square foot space.
They'd be combined.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. Like the common green in between everything. Yep. Yeah, I think it's fine.
So one of the things that I noticed in my Portland trip was that some of these cottage courts had shared open space amenities. So it wasn't necessarily just landscaping. It could have been a bike storage locker, or one had a sauna, outdoor sauna. And so I would tend to concur that, 150 feet per square feet per cottage can combine pretty quickly once we're getting into the multiple cottages. Because if it's only 2 cottages, that's not a cottage court. That's a a duplex or a So I would tend to concur that 150 square feet seems reasonable. Any other commissioners want to weigh in on that? Yeah, Commissioner Robson.
I'll just state for the record that I concur with the 150 square feet minimum per cottage.
We also have this minimum dimension between 15 and 20 feet wide in any direction. And any thoughts on that? Commissioner Westerbeck.
You know what I'm going to say. I think 15 is fine. 20 is better, but not putting a constraint lower than 15 is fine with me, or higher than 15 is fine with me. It might be a smaller cottage court that would employ that. The bigger, more generous ones, I would hope, would be a little larger, because 20s, if you got a decent sized site, 20 is not much bigger. And again, they're going to probably have a little better financial return. But 15, sometimes the extra 5 feet is sometimes what makes a project work on a small site.
So not hearing any other commissioners here, I would tend to concur. When we were doing the Canyon, I'll finish off, and then when we were doing Canyon Park code amendments, there were divergences that could be applied for, or could be sort of discretionary per project. I think that this sort of minimum dimension is very project specific. So on long and narrow lots, 15 feet might even be restrictive. If it's a shared, open space bike locker that is, very long and narrow, might not need to be 15 feet. But I do understand the importance of having a minimum here, just so that it's not exploited. Commissioner Robson, did you have something to add?
I think it dovetails nicely into what you were saying. Are we always sure that shared open spaces are going to be rectangles? What if we're talking in any dimension? Well, what if I don't know, there's a nook in one corner, or something's moon shaped? I don't think we can rule that out. Then you can be like, well, there's this dimension over here, and while generally we can be like, oh, but people kind of will get what we're saying. I feel like if we're going to codify it, let's say what we mean. And so I'm not sure that I'm not sure that this is capturing exactly what we are intending to say by saying it needs to be a minimum of this feet wide. Like, what are we actually saying by saying that? Like, we want it to be a livable space, but if it's a bike locker, do we want it to be a livable space? And so I think it's something to puzzle through.
I guess I would say that so if you had a 10-unit cottage development with 150 square, that'd be 1,500 square feet. In theory, that could be a 15 by 100 foot passage through between, and I think 15 is probably a pretty minimum dimension, and still allows a fair amount of flexibility in different kinds of spaces that could be created. And I did have a chance to check the downtown. We went from the percent or square foot per unit to a percent of net floor area, so we don't have that comparison anymore.
Okay.
Sarah Breakstone, we're right up against your limit. Are you
Yeah.
ready to pass it off to me?
Yeah. Are you able to? I'm going to stop sharing. Can you pull yours up? Or maybe we don't need to share screen.
I think we can follow along in the packet.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
So thank you, and I will report on the final outcome.
Great. Thank you. And I can
Thanks,
always
Sarah.
watch the recording too. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So So we're on number C, or letter C, on page 24. Oh,
Before we, can I just ask for clarification on Commissioner Robson? I think it was her question about what we really mean about 15 feet. Do you mean, are we saying it has to be 15 contiguous feet, or can you have 5 feet here, 5 feet at the back? Was that the concern?
Commissioner Robson?
I mean, as someone who's not entirely familiar with cottage courts, I know the general definition, but I'm not sure exactly how, for example, shared open space would be. But my understanding is that the minimum shared open space of any space with these, the way it's written here, would that any space would be a minimum of 15 feet wide in any dimension, anywhere, even if you split it up, it would still need to be 15 feet by 15 feet. And then I don't know the strict definition, if you could then split it to several open spaces around, but I don't think that's generally how it works. I think all the cottages need to face one open space. I'm not sure, though, if they can split up the open space or how that works.
I was checking the downtown code. We have a similar dimensional requirement there that I'm not finding, but I believe it's 20 feet in the downtown code. Yeah, minimum width of public space shall be 20 feet, which has proved workable. Some developers have tried to push that, and where they're allowed to do smaller spaces, we allow it to go down to 15, minimum 15. So I think that's a defensible standard.
Any other clarifications on that, or are we good to move on?
We're doing a minimum of 15 feet. Is that what we've decided?
We have decided the minimum of 15 feet, and whether that's a circle with the radius of 15 feet or whatever. I think that's a little, it should be intuitive, and I hesitate knowing that loophole. This is possibly like creating a potential for a loophole, but trusting that the discretion of the community development director will be to know that it should be usable space. Commissioner Westerbeck.
I will give a little plug for Senior Planner Boyd and his crew back when I was working on a project, and they were flexible with me. And they were working with the spirit, not always the exact number, and you know, created something I think that worked just fine. So anyway, the community development director does get to have some flexibility.
As somebody who deals in loopholes, I can certainly see someone trying to be creative, but I think it might get a little silly when you're trying to say, well, I have 10 feet over here and 5 over there, let's put them together. So I agree.
Okay.
Let's move on to letter C. This is the percent of cottage courts shall abut the shared open space. So the range that was provided was between 1/2 and 3/4, but a minimum 60-foot shortest safe walking route shall still be maintained. Are there thoughts about the this being connected? This is like the connectedness ratio.
And my concern that I expressed before is if you're trying to do this on a long, narrow lot, both of those could become a challenge. So.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
Unless someone else was going to go.
Go ahead.
I'm okay once again with the minimum. I studied cottages quite a bit, as I know others have, and visited several of the projects by the cottage company, quite a few. I was at some recently. And I was talking to some of the owners, and there's a variety at like Danielson Grove and Kirkland. There's one, they're like a mile from each other. One's Kirkland, one's Redmond. It's Conover Commons and Danielson Grove. They're well known in Ross Chapin's book and everything. But some people really want to be on the green, and then some are kind of down a pathway. And there were owners who preferred to be a little more sequestered back in the forest and didn't really necessarily want to be on the green. And there were others who really want the community of being on the green. So it's interesting to hear there was a little something for each of them. So if we put too many constraints on it, we maybe will constrain the creativity. And, you know, that can be exploited, obviously, by poor site designers and you know, someone who just wants to do what's easy for them. But the majority of cottage projects I see, the designers and developers have some pride in doing that kind of project, because it's actually one of the least lucrative kinds of projects and one of the most difficult to pull off. So they're usually doing it because they like the product type and they're trying to do something cool. So anyway, I tend to think that we don't want to get too restrictive there, because there are people who want to be away from, maybe they're more introverted, but they want to be part of that cottage community. So it was really instructive to talk to some of these owners about what they liked and preferred and didn't prefer. So just wanted to chime in with that.
I would, not seeing anyone else weighing in, I would concur, and also want to make sure that the shared open space is accessible. So we don't want it to be in, like, I know it can't be located in a buffer or whatever, but we wouldn't want it to be like across the street or up a steep slope, or, you know, just the only unusable part of the lot be the open space. Now, again, is that really practically what's going to occur when these developments are really difficult to plan and they're very custom, and they, you know, people put a lot of resource into them to make them actually pencil out? I would be comfortable with the 50%. Or no, I would be comfortable striking the first sentence and then having the second sentence remain about the walking distance, the safe walking distance from cottages.
Striking, meaning what? Because the second one will take over.
Yes. So thanks
compensate.
for that. Yep. Letter C would start with, all cottages shall be within 60 feet walking distance measured from the nearest entrance of the cottage, along the shortest safe walking route to the nearest point of the shared open space. And this would make sure that the shared open space is accessible, but that there can be diversity in location of the homes to the open space. Commissioner Kiernan.
Should it then say accessible? I'm not sure safe equals accessible.
Excellent point. Yeah. Yeah, I would support changing that word safe to accessible.
Or adding
safe, comma, accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, accessible is more restrictive than safe, but yeah, true. Any comments?
Is there?
I guess my only comment is, how are we going to define safe, or do we leave it up to developer, or how safe in terms of, no criminally safe or safe from obstructions or just a safe, clear walking path? What are we gonna, I think we should take safe out because I feel like safe can be, open to too much interpretation. And I think everybody knows what acceptable is. I don't know if would want us trying to tackle or worrying about what somebody might consider safe.
You're getting a lot of head nods here. Yeah. I think that's a consensus.
Okay. Is there consensus about striking the first sentence then?
Commissioner Robson?
I'm not sure I'm ready to strike that first sentence just yet. I feel like if we don't keep at least some percentage of the cottages abutting the shared open space, then it really isn't a cottage court anymore. It could just be a strip of very long houses. So I feel like we should, if we're going to define it as a cottage court, we should say this is what it needs to be surrounding some kind of shared open space in order for it to fall within cottage housing definition. Otherwise, it just wouldn't strike me as falling under the same definition. But maybe I'm just misunderstanding. Maybe I'm not puzzling this out the right way. In short, I think I would stick for at least 50% of the cottages sharing the open space.
Commissioner Westerbeck?
I'd support that in part because traditionally cottage development is around a green or a court. So at least 50% of the houses being around it makes sense to me, so I could support that.
And I would say in the example I gave on a long, narrow lot, that if the shared space was a passage, a 15-foot wide by 100-foot passage, then that's probably pretty easy. There's a lot of ways you can meet that standard. So
I'll double dip and say I've been to a couple that had that configuration. There's one in Shoreline. It's kind of a landscaped thing with vine maples and stuff, and it's basically a landscape path between the cottages. And then there's again a section of the Kirkland, I think it's Danielson Grove, where they have a similar situation.
okay,
I'll weigh in and say, yes, I agree. That's exactly right. Yeah, it's a cottage court. It's not cottage cram.
but we intentionally didn't call these cottage courts in the code. We're just cottage housing but
Sure.
they are often called cottage court housing. There's one more variable in that section, in the next subsection 2B, minimum dimension of private open space. We didn't provide a variable amount. It's set at 200 square feet, so that could be adjusted too, but minimum dimension of 6 or 8 feet, or 6. Would the
This is under 2B. We're on page 25. It kind of bridges between page 24 and 25.
should we go with the
This would also be
trend?
number 3 too, right? The numbering is maybe off.
Oh, you're right.
Oh, good catch. That's why there was confusion.
I'll chime in. Oddly enough, I'm not going to take a hard line on this one within, say, 6 feet, because there's in the Congress and New Urbanism folks and stuff, they'll often say you got to have a minimum of 8 feet for the front porch. They're big on that. So they've drilled that into me. I don't think 6 would be the end of the world. So again, I don't feel like I really have a dog in this fight. But a lot of people feel like a private space should be no less than 8 feet. But 6 is probably could, on the other hand, someone who lays out sites that it can be pretty tight. Sometimes 6 is all you can squeeze out, and I would hate to see that to be a project killer.
Any thoughts? I will say, as someone who just is now figuring out how to live in a new home, and my private open space is a deck, and it is narrower in than these, and it would be nice if it was 8 feet. Put a hammock out there or something. So yeah, I would tend to kind of concur. 6 feet seems narrow for someone who is over 1 inch over 6 feet. Any other feedback? Yeah, Commissioner Robson.
Along that token, though, do we really want to cancel, if they can't pencil that out, do we want to be like have them remove a whole cottage because they can't? I mean, you bought your place, though, even though you have less than 8 feet. Aren't you glad you have that place? I mean, we're saying a minimum of 6 feet. They could give more, and it sounds like the standard is very often 8 feet, but if they can add an extra cottage, they just can only provide 6 feet. It seems to me like we shouldn't cancel projects because of they can't get in 8 feet.
That's a good point. I would also say that private open space could be a roof deck, right? Or there could be some creative ways around that too. So I'm really actually most excited in all these amendments for the cottage, because I know that this is going to stimulate a lot of creativity, and I'm here for it. That said, yes, I guess I don't really have a huge, what's the difference between 6 and 8 if it means someone can afford to remain in Bothell. So I wouldn't take a hard line on 8 feet, and it sounds like that's sort of the consensus.
Yes.
Commissioner Anders?
No, I was just agreeing. I think six makes sense. I mean, it would never work for me because everybody in my house is over 6 feet, but for somebody it might. So I like it.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, that was section, I guess, 3B.
And
Moving
I've
along.
noted changing the numbering, and that takes us on to courtyard housing, the other kind of special housing type. The reason we're focusing on courtyard and cottage is because they don't really fit on a single family lot. So they've got a little bit different, and they have the shared open space requirement. So the first question has to do with the minimum dimension. It would seem to me that what we decided for cottages would apply here too. Is that a fair assumption? 15 feet?
Are we in agreement that the same should be applied? So we're at page 25, C, courtyard housing, number 4, letter A. At the end of that paragraph, the shared open space must be a minimum of a range between 15 and 20 feet wide in any dimension. Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thanks, Commissioner Curd. Yeah, I would agree. We could do the same. When I think about these, I think about them sort of holistically or globally, kind of, human dimensions and stuff like that. So if we copied most of the same, if not all the same, from the courtyard cottage housing, I'd be fine.
I'm seeing some nodding of heads.
Okay.
A couple of nodding heads. Yep, 3 nodding heads.
And then
I agree.
Thank you.
there's a range also for the amount of open space per private unit. Now, courtyards housing is a little more urban form than cottage housing, so the range is lower. It goes from 60 to 200. And again, this is for the private open space.
If I may.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
I know I'm talking a lot. I would just point out, as a point of clarification for the others, and Dave knows as well, we require 60, if I'm not mistaken, in the sub-area code for the downtown area, just as a point of reference.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we can set it up, more urban place. So, and I'm okay with 60 there as well.
Others concur? I'm seeing some nodding.
Yeah.
Okay.
The minimum dimension here, are we also in concurrence with the previously discussed item for minimum? I'm seeing some nodding heads. Yep, we're in agreement there too.
And then it's not a variable, well, it's not a variable, but I think in your code at subsection 6D, the screening of off-street parking has some X's, some placeholders, and I'm proposing what we use in other codes for parking screening, which is a type 3 landscaping that is at least 5 feet wide. That's.
Can you reiterate what type 3 landscaping is?
I'm going to have to look it up.
Thank you.
I don't have that memorized, but it shouldn't take too long. It's is heavy on deciduous trees to provide shading for parking areas. Type 3 is intended to provide visual relief between incompatible uses and against building facades. It's a mixture of deciduous and coniferous with maximum 75% deciduous. Space 25 feet on center.
So this would mean deciduous trees, or could it be shrubs and other?
A mix of trees and undercover elements.
Okay.
They all have a mixture of shrubs, ground covers, and other plant material to provide 80% surface coverage within 2 years.
Okay.
And how wide?
5 feet. And that's pretty typical parking lot screening standard.
I'm seeing some nodding heads up here, some on Zoom. Okay. Yeah, I think we have some consensus.
And then moving on, we get into accessory units, and I guess to boil it down, first of all, I wanted to note that we've heard a fair amount of feedback that some of the regulations that were designed to make accessory dwelling units inconspicuous and fit in, like only having one entrance face the street, and some of the screening requirements that were added when we relaxed the requirements for carriage house type units. Based on the discussion we've had about middle housing, those restrictions seemed they went beyond what we haven't proposed any such restrictions for middle housing, so we're proposing striking those from the accessory housing code. And I guess the more substantive question there is, should the way we've drafted the code, we would allow middle housing accessory units with any primary unit, and we've defined middle housing units as primary units, but only one for situations where it's not a detached single-family house. So we allow an attached and a detached for detached single-family, and one for other types, including multifamily developments in the form of townhomes. So if that is acceptable, that's essentially what we've tried to capture here.
Commissioner Westerbeck?
Can I ask a clarifying question? I like this, and because it sounds like you said you had some residents who had asked about it in the past. So a lot of townhouses don't have much extra space. So these must be lots, maybe they're older townhouses or newer ones that have more space. So ostensibly they have the space to meet the setback requirements and is it, townhouse takes up a lot of its space, a lot of its lot usually. So trying to think how that's reconciled with lot coverage and things like that. Is it just has to be a bigger lot so it can meet the standards?
Yeah, so we're defining townhouse as a unit, attached unit that's on a separate lot.
Yeah, like fee simple lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they just happen to have enough land on their fee simple lot, unlike some of the newer townhouses.
Yeah.
They've got the space to work with. Okay, that's cool. Yeah.
And they're limited to one, not.
Yeah,
not one.
that seems reasonable.
But, and then a fourplex on a single-family lot, that would, there'd be a limit of one per lot, so.
Yeah, that would make sense, because I was even thinking, your 4 dwelling maximum or something, so allowing a fifth seems a pretty nice jump. So, no complaints here.
Commissioner Kiernan.
No, sorry. Just clearing my throat.
If anyone wants to weigh in. I'm not seeing any opposition.
And then the last section, we didn't really pose any questions, but just so that well, it's not the last section. The next section has to do with the parking standards that we've discussed before.
Clarification, did we cover the question that Commissioner Gustafson had about the waived language that was missing from was it item accessory dwelling units, item 4? Didn't you say they had the waiver, the line was entirely missing? Mm-hmm. Did we get that in the record somehow? Because I think we're going to come back to it.
Sorry, I'm
yeah.
not following.
Earlier when we were still had Sarah Breakstone on quite a while ago, Commissioner Gustafson, and you can always take over if you want, we found that there was language about waiving the parking.
Oh, right.
And it was just, that line was missing. And it probably would have been C or A. Well, there's A and B. I guess there'd be a C there about waiving parking if there were certain conditions met. And that it was in Sarah's PowerPoint.
So as it's drafted, the conditions are that the AD is located within a half-mile walking distance
Yeah.
of a transit stop.
Did I get that wrong, maybe?
And the second condition is within a half-mile of a regional trail. So it's applying the same criteria that we applied to corner lot.
Maybe my note was erroneous then. I thought there was something.
Or was there another condition?
There was something in the PowerPoint that didn't show up in the actual code language.
Right, thank you.
It was something about waiving the parking requirement for some reason, and I got lost in it, but you guys you and Sarah seem to realize that it was an omission.
Yeah, she caught it, and I just didn't want us to skip over it, and I don't have the PowerPoint up, so I can't remember.
I think it was, so.
Justin remembers.
Street parking.
Street parking. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay.
So should we also waive it if they can demonstrate that there's adequate street parking?
And that's why it was germane to me, because I feel like Bothell's got a lot of street parking, as Justin brought up earlier. It's often very generous. So I would say they should be able to be waiving it if there's street parking. And I heard Macker earlier mention the tight parking and stuff, and I thought he had a lot of good points. One thing that relates to that, one great thing about being in Seattle, probably frustrates a lot of people, some of those tight streets, they slow people down, and there's less opportunities for traffic violence and getting hit. But when you're on a bike or walking, when cars have to be really careful. And that's something they actually employ in the Netherlands and places like that, where you have to be on guard, and it slows you down. So I don't think having extra cars on the street is such a bad thing.
I think I probably have been a proponent of not waiving for street parking. And I won't go there again, but I just want us to think about the fact that we're talking about, bike lanes and things on the streets as well. And some of those changes might make streets even narrower. I don't know how those things are going to be taken into consideration when we're talking about where we're waiving the parking requirement. If there's street parking, and does that change if we start to add bike lanes to what now appears to be ample parking? That might change and make it, even just make it difficult to maneuver between streets when we're driving some of these bigger cars, or just a thought.
Commissioner Robson, go ahead.
If I could ask a clarifying question, how do we have somebody prove that they have street parking? I mean, is there an approval process for that?
Some jurisdictions require a study and actually look at parking utilization within an area. The others basically just say if there is street parking within a certain radius, say 200 feet or 200 feet of the lot, then there's an assumption that there will be available parking. One reason to condition it would be former Commissioner Dodd mentioned that her house is in an area that has no street parking. So she questioned whether we could eliminate it in all cases. So. So we could add a C that says that one of the conditions would be the ADU is located in an area with street parking available within 200 feet of the lot. Could be 300, 400, I don't know.
Go ahead.
And then they would do a study?
No,
And then they would do a study to,
this wouldn't require a study. They would just have to say that, yes.
that yes, there is, and, okay. And because I'm really sympathetic to the disparity in availability of parking on different streets. Of course, that really depends on the area. And so, particularly as someone with small children, while it's wonderful to say, oh, this really will slow cars down, but it also hides kids. And that makes me exceptionally nervous. So I like the idea of having the developer, when we say available on-street parking, some sort of proof, not hard proof, but some sort of evidence to give them discretion depending on the area. I mean, if we're talking about someone who lives near a school and we have, really crowded parking all the way down the street, when school gets out, that's just a death trap. So, so yeah, that kind of thing. So I think we do need to be aware that different areas are going to have different needs, and on-street parking, available on-street parking will mean different things.
Any other commissioners care to weigh in? Commissioner Gustafson?
Sarah Gustafson here. Thank you, Vice Chair. My one clarification for number 4 is, I think if we're listing all the conditions, we need to keep the language that only one of them needs to be met, as opposed to all 3 needing to be met.
That's how it's worded now.
Um, I'm not hearing consensus.
I don't feel strongly about it, so I will, go with whatever the consensus of the rest of the commission is.
I think this could be another item that we could save for implementation. Tracking how many people might be utilizing this section of code to find reductions, and once we start ideally, hopefully, getting applications for alternative housing types, this would be something that we might need to be more flexible on, or maybe more restrictive on later. And I don't think we can really make a recommendation or a legislation this early out on something that can have a lot of potential. There's so many things that could happen. So I think we need to wait before opening it up. Commissioner Westerbeck.
Is this a situation where, like we occasionally see in the code, that it's up to a community development director final decision or something? I don't know if that's worse, but I know that occasionally the code says that they get the discretion.
Commissioner Kiernan.
Yeah, I guess one of the challenges I see with available on-street parking is keeping track of it. And by which I mean, okay, I develop and I say, okay, I'm claiming that space is available for my development. Somebody a couple of lots down also develops. Are we keeping track of the number of available spaces which are allocated to development, and at what point are there no more spaces available? So I'm not opposed to it. I just think we need to think about implementation.
I'm getting a lot of head nods from that comment. Yep.
So, which means leaving this criteria out for now, but to study it with our next grant.
Yes.
I think that's fair.
Thank you. Before we move on too far, I know that we're getting near the end, but I should have asked if anyone needs a break, maybe a 2 or 5 minute break. No? I see one head nod, so we're going to take a 5-minute break.
Okay, so we'll reconvene at, I've got 8:37, so 8:42.
That sounds good. Thank you. All right, thank you. The commission is back in session. Thanks for that short break. We were on, we just finished discussing item 4, and I wanted to take a brief moment to discuss item 5 because it came up in public comment. The accessory dwelling unit shall not exceed 1,000 square feet of floor area in 5A on page 27. Was there any feedback on that? Commissioner Westerbeck?
I have seen codes to reference Matt Carter's comments earlier that allow 1,200 square feet. I don't think that's excessive. So I'd be okay with going a little larger. So I will put that out there. It's kind of like the 10% bonus we talked about earlier. 200 square feet isn't that much as far as building out something on site, but that 200 square feet can make a big difference in a small home. Just as someone who designs small homes, so I'm okay with that. I don't think it would materially, most people looking at a 1,200 square foot project, say 600 square feet on 2 stories or something like that, probably not going to feel massively different to a neighbor than 1,000 square feet, but it means a whole extra bedroom and closet and a bathroom or something. So I'm okay with that.
One of my questions would be if this is 1,000 square foot footprint, or is it floor area? Let's say there's a loft or something. Would that add into that 1,000 foot calculation?
It's floor area.
Floor area,
Yeah.
so it would.
That's my understanding. Like could be, 800 with a 400 square foot loft, or 600 or something like that. And I know Matt Carter mentioned just a much larger footprint. But then we do get to like a 1,200 square foot footprint that's bigger than our first home, which was a Rambler. So we started to get to, house sizes then, and kind of not the spirit of an ADU anymore.
The other side of that is with the ability to do duplexes. If you want to do a bigger unit, then you can just permit it as a duplex.
Great. Any other feedback on this item? Commissioner Robson?
I think that 1,200 square feet of floor area is fine, especially if a developer has that as a sort of there's a design plan kind of ready to go. That's a local developer. That was my understanding from the public comment. That we could utilize that if that's a building standard, that 1,200 square feet is easier for people to implement. I don't think that 200 square feet is that big a deal if it will make things easier for people to build accessory dwelling units.
Other feedback?
I might add something. It's an accessory dwelling unit shall not exceed, let's say, 1,200 square feet floor area, or 80% of the primary dwelling's floor area. So I don't know if that would need to bump up to 85 or something, but or whichever is smaller, or we leave it at 80% and we say whichever is bigger. But as Senior Planner Boyd pointed out, if these code provisions all pass, then people have a lot more. It used to be all you could do is an ADU, so you were really hamstrung by these if you had a single family home and you're going to add something. So now you could say, well, I'm just going to go a little bigger, and it's going to be a second unit, and it's going to be a duplex or something like that. So maybe that's not as important, but do we want to say, we'd rather it be smaller, or it's okay. You can max it out to the 1,200 if you're looking at a small home and 80% is it's 80% of a 750 square foot, World War II box, whatever we call those, the kind of old standard single family house from the old days. Then you're limited to 500 square feet or something, where you might have wanted to do 1,000 or 1,200. So I just want to throw that out there. I'd probably add, allow them to do the maximum, provided they meet lot coverage and setback and so forth elsewhere in the code.
I think the alternative there is, what if they have a 5,000 square foot house, and then an 85 or 80% of that is a lot more than we would want an ADU to be.
Very good point.
I was just doing the math on that myself.
Thank you, guys.
So yeah, Commissioner Robson.
I do think I remember somebody coming and giving us a public comment about having a very small house and wanting to build an accessory dwelling unit that would be bigger than their older home. And in that case, it wouldn't be a duplex. It would be an accessory dwelling unit bigger than their house. And so in that case, the maximum, saying whichever one is bigger makes sense. But so,
Do we add a not to exceed or something then, or maybe that's just a moot point at that point then?
not to exceed.
I mean, maybe I'm just.
Well, this is a regulation, a limitation on the size of the ADUs. So I think whichever is smaller is appropriate.
Okay.
It was Mr. Carter who brought the
Right.
situation with the small house on a largish lot. So the solution there is that he can build the house and turn the existing house
Yeah.
into the ADU.
Yeah.
I had that conversation with Dave once.
So I want to get either consensus or move on from increasing the 1,000 to 1,200. Is there consensus on that, or yeses, nos, thumbs up, thumbs down? Seeing 2 thumbs up, 3 thumbs up, 4, 5, 6. Okay, consensus 1,200. And I think that the last conversation was kind of enlightening about the.
Yeah, scratch the other stuff I said. I didn't think it through.
Great. All right, let's move along. Before we leave ADUs, I would like to address that final public comment item about ADUs, which was development of an ADU in a shoreline management zone. So, response to that?
My feeling is that the shoreline management regulations would prevail in any case. So the no net loss rules would apply still and would control. So that in itself might limit the opportunities for ADUs or even middle housing within the shoreline jurisdiction. But I think it would be a step too far to outlaw them entirely within the shoreline jurisdiction, to take that option away from those properties.
I'm seeing head nods. I also work in shoreline areas a lot. And in, I don't think that it would be wise to do a blanket ban. The regulations in Shoreline Master Program are more restrictive, and I think that they do govern and they do protect those sensitive areas. And really, middle housing is part of that, the heart and the effort behind the whole idea of shoreline master planning, which is to create habitat for people, separate from habitat from wildlife and other natural things. So I think that I don't necessarily think that there needs to be any, there doesn't need to be a blanket ban either. So thank you for addressing that. If there's no other item here, oh yeah, Commissioner Gustafson.
Sarah Gustafson here. I did want to confirm that on page 18, we have decided on the threshold for developments that need to create affordable housing. On page 18, under 1207030, section A, I see both digits there, 5 and 10, and have we made a motion to cross one out? I think we want to cross out 5.
Yeah, that was the direction I got.
Yeah, so, okay, so that will be done.
We will be crossing out the 5 and 10 will remain.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for clarifying that. Yes, that was highlighted.
So the rest of the code, the next section with edits are the parking requirements. And one of the commenters did reference our multifamily and single family, well, multifamily and the commission has referenced our single family standards, but again, we've already made the recommendation that we do a citywide study, and so I would like to stay focused on the middle housing requirements here, and the proposal for 1 per unit for ADUs, cottages and courtyards, with the exceptions that we just talked about, and then 3 for duplexes, 4 for triplexes, and 5 for fourplexes.
Commissioner Westerbeck?
You know, I've got a comment on parking. I had this marked up in previous packets as well, and I don't think we got to it, but to me, there's an inconsistency if we require only 1 for a cottage and courtyard, and then it's 1 extra for duplex, 1 extra for tri, and 4. I would basically say 1 per unit minimum and leave it at that. That would be my suggestion. I think a lot, again, not every time, but a lot of developers are going to try and get that extra spot in anyway if they've got the space, but not always. I mean, I'm going to admit that, absolutely. But that would just be more consistent. So that would be my thought on that. And then we've got multifamily and single family attached, 2 per dwelling unit, 1 plus 1 guest for every 5. Multifamily, since there are more dwellings together, I guess it starts to get a little overlappy with fourplexes, but I would probably still say, you know, I'd almost simplify the whole thing and just say 1 per unit minimum. And then if they want to do more, sure. I don't know if we need to do a maximum, but that could be streamlined a little bit.
That would
I
provide.
agree with the recommendation on duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. I don't see a need for the 1 extra. I would agree to just keep it consistent.
Yeah, that's just weird.
That would create an opportunity to simplify it. We could just say middle housing.
Yeah, 1 per unit.
Eliminate 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
Seeing a lot of nodding.
Yes, I am too.
Okay.
Consensus.
And, oops. I'm doing some edits on the fly here. Bear with me for a second. Okay. And then the remaining edits are there's a whole section here on the Sunrise Valley View district in downtown, which is basically the formerly R8400 and R9600 areas that are within. So we're just applying the same rules there.
I read through this earlier, but kind of quickly, the same rules from the missing middle code or from the sub-area code downtown?
From the missing middle code.
Missing middle, okay.
Basically
got it.
allowing duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. We decided that since that's a fully developed single-family district, that there really weren't opportunities for cottages and courtyards there, so.
Commissioner Gustafson, did you have a comment?
No, I'm sorry. I think I still have this on.
Okay.
And then at the very end is the reference to the not allowing new CCNRs to prohibit middle housing. And there's some discussion about whether the language should reside in 1206 or whether it should reside in somewhere in Title 15. And be cross-referenced from the other one, but the effect is the same. So I think that's a tweak that we can make as we take it to council.
Yeah, I for one appreciate you going into that and clearing it with legal and everything. That's a really important part of all of these regulations, are to make sure that no one part of the city is experiencing change at the expense of the other parts of the city. And so it's really important that we make sure that there aren't enclaves of our city that restrict different types of housing for different types of people. So.
And as Sarah Breakstone noted, we can't make this retroactive, so it will just apply to CCNRs going forward.
Understood. Great. Are there any final commissioner comments on this code read through? Okay. Well, I think at this time we can shift to looking at attachment 1.
And if at any point you would like me to share, I can do that, but.
I'm assuming everyone has this in their packets. It's page 9 of the packet. These will be the draft commission findings, conclusions, and recommendations. This has been quite a long planning process, but I did notice in number 4, public meetings, I don't know if 2002, I certainly wasn't on the commission at that time. That might be an error. It should be 2022.
I'm sorry.
But were there any other items that jumped out to people before we kind of read through the deliberations? So these findings are pretty boilerplate, but wanted to make sure we had a moment to read through it. Okay. Then in this case, I think we'll move to page 10. I would like to take some time to make sure that commissioners are comfortable with these deliberations and specific findings, because this is what's going to be passed on to council and made as part of the record, summing up all of the work that we have done on this. So want to make sure that these are representative. I don't know if we need to read through them verbally, but I would like to take some time that commissioners can read through and make sure that these are representative.
The one that jumps out for me, this is Mr. Andrews, is 3D. It talks about parking reductions, and since we're going to do studies on that later. Should that be stricken?
3B,
Parking reductions for middle housing and all zones, or is that different? I know we talked about two different, the street parking versus something else, and
oh, 3D,
all
sorry,
getting-
okay, yeah. Yeah, would this be different? Parking reductions for middle housing. Well, if middle housing wasn't really allowed in those zones to begin with, it wouldn't really be a reduction. It would be establishing parking regulations for middle housing in all zones.
So I think that still applies. What we decided not to move forward on was the reductions with existing street parking, to study that further.
Okay.
So
Commissioner Gustafson, did you have something to add there?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Sarah Gustafson here. I think in the document we worked on at the previous meeting, we decided to always insert parking minimum reductions or somehow indicate that we're not reducing parking. We're not
That
taking away
is-
anything.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Thanks. So 3D and also finding 12.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The change was to add the word minimum after parking where it occurs and says parking reductions. And that happens twice in 3D and 12.
okay, I've captured both those.
Thank you. Continuing to take a moment just to read through, especially 6 through 18, 19.
And I've already added the new exhibits 14 through 17. I failed to enter them into the record. So exhibit 14 was a letter from Cami Gray of the Snohomish County Camino Association of Realtors in support of the proposal. Exhibit 15 was an email from Amanda Gurley expressing some opposition to the proposal. As was Exhibit 16 from Artis Schmeej, and Exhibit 17 was an email from Ann Agard, who also testified tonight, with some suggestions for changes. And then I've added the 3 speakers at tonight's hearing.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you, Sarah Gustafson here. Do we want to add perhaps a finding 14 or add within finding 14, like we anticipate the adoption of a tree canopy code? I don't quite know how to do that, but I really do feel like there are a lot of really valid concerns from our residents who are worried about losing our trees, and even some council members who are worried about losing our trees, and maybe we could help allay those concerns and also put some priority to the tree canopy.
Yeah. I would say this is maybe something that could take a lot of time to workshop, but maybe something along the lines of the Planning Commission understands the importance of urban tree canopy and natural amenities, and that we deliberated on and incorporated accommodations in the code for flexibility in order to preserve existing trees and encourage new amenities. That said, we encourage council to investigate or explore further tree canopy protection and growth. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Is that sort of along the lines of something that you, okay.
You two, that was perfect.
Okay. That is a quick workshopping for this late hour, but yes, that's also important too. So if we could add something along those lines, that would be appreciated, at least by 2 commissioners. Is that generally consistent? I want to make sure that I'm not speaking for just myself. Okay. Yeah, so I want to make sure people have had time to read through these deliberations and specific findings all the way to number 19, the public comments. Were there any items that needed to be changed or tweaked or removed? Not seeing anybody responding to that, so let's read through the conclusions really quick. These are pretty boilerplate. I just want to make sure that they are Yep. So I would entertain a motion to approve these draft Planning Commission findings, conclusions, and recommendations. Commissioner Kiernan.
I move that we adopt the Planning Commission findings, conclusions, and recommendations as amended through this discussion.
Commissioner Robson.
I second.
I'm hearing a motion to approve these findings, conclusion, recommendations on middle housing code amendments. And a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed and abstentions. It is unanimous.
Excellent, thank you. And
Oh.
I will provide the revised findings for review by, I guess, Chair Kiernan.
Chair Kiernan, yes.
And then circulate those to the commission. So,
Commissioner Kiernan, do you have an item to discuss?
Oh, I just wanted to thank Senior Planner Boyd for his work on this item. It's been in progress for a long time. He's listened to feedback from the commission very well, I think. The findings and deliberations he presented represented this discussion we had, so I want to express appreciation for that. So thank you, Senior Planner Boyd.
Yeah, I would totally concur with that.
Concur as well.
Yes. All right.
I will add that the commission's deliberations and specific findings, you remembered and wrote down a lot of things that were important to us that I had even forgotten. So, and wrote it very clearly. So, huge appreciation, Dave.
yeah. Thank you. One thing I did miss was who made the second on that motion?
That was Commissioner Robson.
Robson, okay.
All right. Moving right along, we have any unfinished business?
I can't remember if we stated for the record that we no longer have Commissioner Dodd, who was sworn in as our new council member last night. So I'd just like to express my appreciation for her work on the commission and best wishes for her tenure on council.
I would concur. I'm hearing a lot of positive feedback on that here tonight, and encouragement that we have representation who has delved into the details at Planning Commission. I think that's really important, and just speaks to the role of getting into the code and making sure that it's working for the people of Bothell. Any reports from staff?
Came out of the corner for reports from staff. Just wanted to let you all know that we are working with the city clerk's office and the city manager's office on next steps for a new planning commissioner. We might be asking you all some questions too on your preference of moving forward. And so just wanted to let you know we are having those talks, but in the last day haven't had those talks. And other than that, no major updates from us. We're just getting ready for our new director to join us and getting things started for the comprehensive plan.
Great. Thanks for that update. Any reports from members? All right. Items to report to council. All right. Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Commissioner Gustafson,
Sarah Gustafson here. I move to adjourn.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
I second the motion to adjourn.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That is unanimous. Thank you, everybody. And the next meeting is 14 days from now. That would be the 21st. 21st, yeah, must be.
And for the record, we adjourned at 9:15.
That is correct. Thanks. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you.